Alright, welcome to part 3 of the Spanish won the 7 Years' War and their alliance, of course. But in the last episode, we saw the destruction of the Turkish alliance along with the allies in Sweden. So it's kind of like the real World War One, except that the post-war map looks really, really different. The Spanish are even more dominant because they took over most of the Swedish colony, and everything's kind of strange and weird. But I've made a list of all the different events that occurred in our series Interwar period, because to be honest, this series has already deviated so far, and I can't really already paste it because there's just so much it's changed. Also, I don't think you've seen the peace treaty yet, so we can go through that briefly. North America, this country got released as one big Canadian Union because the Swedes kind of had two main areas of colonization, with one bit in Quebec, and then after the 7 Years' War, there would have been a big bit here. And, I just thought it'd be kind of cool to make a large Canadian country, especially since the Green One over here lost a lot of their most important land to the Irish in the south. Then we have two different countries here. This was like the more Icelandic bit from when the Icelandic Arctic country was there, and then this is kind of the newerish stuff. I could have made the borders different, but I didn't. And then there's an orange country that is just, it's kind of like a union. It's like a cultural union of the German and Polish colonies, and then the Swedish took them over. So yeah, loads of cool stuff. Over in Europe, lots of things stayed the same. Like in Anatolia, it's all pretty much the same. The Ukrainians have different borders because I never liked the Ukrainian borders in this thing. Anyway, Caucasia got some land because they didn't get all their land that they would have wanted. Like the Caucasians claimed this stuff, but Astrakhan never joined the war because it was a silly idea. And Russia never got involved from the start. These four guys are all here. There's the United Baltic Nation, Norway's smaller, Germany's got all of Denmark, some weird colonial stuff, Ireland now in Western Australia. Yeah, things like that. But quite importantly, the war between China and Korea never happened because Russia joined the war a lot later, and Korea didn't bankrupt their entire nation funding the Russians to prevent other bad things happening, like the Turkish and the Chinese working together to destroy their country. Which ultimately led to the country being destroyed by China anyway. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, let's start with the events. Let's actually get up my cool list of events. I think the first one is going to be the Mesopotamian invasions of both these Turkish countries. I won't do it in chronological order, like it was in the series, but I'm going to just throw everything together. The Mesopotamians will have the same sort of ideas they had in the real series, and there's a good character into here, of course. And if you've watched some of the series, especially the Cold War bit, you may definitely know what they're planning, but they're easily, of course, going to have to move through both of these nations, with them getting absolutely obliterated very quickly by the far superior Mesopotamian military. So that country's gone. Medina didn't get invaded. The Southern Indians, by the way, are also here. That's like a really major change for all the stuff that has happened in this world. Alliances, I thought I updated this, but apparently I didn't. Why? Oh, it's Turkish. I was like, why are you part of the old Turkish alliance? Yeah. So of course, all for the old Turkish countries. Why this? Confuses me. Yep, we see the Pentagon alliance between all 5 of these countries. However, 2 new alliances will be formed following the war. One of them makes a lot more sense than the other one, but they're both kind of weird. The first one is going to be the Square Team alliance, and it's going to be between the Polish, the United Baltic country, which there is a reason for. It's because Poland had earned this land before, but instead taking it back, they wanted a united country up there, and all 4 of these nations will form an alliance. Okay, Poland just had to be annoying. However, they're going to gain one other member, but they're kind of far away, as they are all the way over here in North America, because this country has also joined the alliance, and it's a really weird one because they're far away. And then the second alliance we see form is also over here in Western Europe. You can be circled, sure. And it's between the Lowlands country and Norway, who doesn't have a capital, but it's fine. In the real life timeline, the Norwegians had a Dutch king. I feel like they probably still have those links, even at this point in the series, like later on, from the Norwegian independence. And honestly, I just wanted to make an alliance like this. So, there we go. Anyway, Mesopotamia invaded those countries. Where's my list? And yeah, the other things after that, Russian invasions of stuff, so some things won't really change. However, there's some different diplomatic things, because actually I had a really cool reasoning plan now. But the Russians, of course, will begin their invasions of the brown nations. They move just straight into that nation, and then they start to invade into the northern parts of the Red Country, and absolutely obliterate it too. Probably take the capital a bit earlier. To be honest, we could kind of just do all 4 of these Russian country invasions just now, so I'm gonna not waste time. They're gonna push into the capital of the Blue Country and take over this nation, and then finally they do it to the Yellow one, pushing straight through and taking their capital. So that means that all 4 of these mini North Ukrainian nations are completely obliterated. Goodbye, you didn't really ever do anything. And now you're gone. There was never a purple one either, because Ukraine looked different. And also, like, Caucasia had to be recompensed for more land in eastern Ukraine, so Ukraine got to keep land in the west instead of just being a very little country. But diplomatically, the new kind of rivalry that's popping up is between the Spanish and the Russians, as both of these countries are kind of really starting to hate each other at this point, especially the Russians, the Spanish and the Southern Indians, because the Southern Indians really want the return of what is effectively Goa, and also the colonial empires are starting to hate each other. There's a trade, different agreement, fight things between that, but also other stuff like the tensions between China and Korea are very, very deep, and they hate each other a lot. And yeah, there's some new players like Russia and Mesopotamia, and we kind of just have to wait and see how they will affect stuff. But with Korea being very afraid of China, they're going to move towards Russia, who, in our timeline, they had good relations with Russia because they obviously spent loads of money helping the Russians. And here, with Russia being kind of less involved in Europe, they're going to be more worried about Asia and the fact that China, here, and it looks like they're going to attack people. So Russia and Korea are going to grow very close, and it means there'll be more Russian focus on Europe rather than Russian focus in Asia rather than Europe, where they might try and invade the Square Alliance or do something weird like that. Anyway, and then the other event, because of course the Great Depression is still ongoing, so the Chinese are still going to have to move in. So yeah, unfortunately, we're still going to move into the Blue Country and completely annex this one. So this is about, I would say, episode 1 over. But there you go, the Blue Country is now gone. I have some much weirder borders over here in China. But luckily, what happens in the next episode is, I wasn't quite sure on the borders for the Tibetan stuff, so I went and checked the actual episode. Oh damn it! Actual episode 72 to make sure I got the borders right, because I don't see a reason why they'd be different in this timeline. So yeah, this happens. But of course, in this timeline, it also moved the Tibetans and the Chinese closer, and with China now being afraid of growing Russian-Korean axis, let's just make some new alliances. We've already got a parallelogram. You can be diamonds. Just make that 2. And you can also join the Diamond Alliance. And you're also very close with the Kashmiri country, who's basically the same ethnicity, so they can join your alliance too. And then over here between the Russians and the Koreans, they will form whatever shape. That's a trapezium. They'll form the Trapezium Alliance. Very far away with their capital cities, but it's fine. It'll probably be okay. Anyway, so there you go, a couple of new alliances, and this world has a lot of different kind of axes to it, so that's very cool. But China and India also don't like each other because of how many areas that they have to share, like in Papua New Guinea and Borneo and the Moluccas area and Australia. There's so many points for them to clash over. Also, speaking of alliances, there's one other country that needs to be added to alliance, and it's to the Pentagon Alliance, and it's Ethiopia, because they're basically just a puppet of the Southern Indians, so they should be in this alliance. Next up, it's the partition of Turkey, and that's actually just going to go the same as real life, so I'll just do that. Right, so the borders end up just the same as they were in our timeline. I don't see any reason why they would change, and the Italians probably still have the ambitions on the territory, so I'm like, yeah, sure, they can keep that. Cool. What else? So in this timeline, also we had the Orange and the Gangetic countries over here in northern India go to war with each other. However, yeah, I mean, I wish she'd actually knock. That would make everything better if she just knocked the door. But no, she can't think that far. Yeah, both these countries. Let's get a rant. Both these countries went to war with each other because they had lots of rivalries over this territory. But in this timeline, they're allies. They currently go to war, and maybe they're potentially closer allies because of how economically tied they've become with each other. They're both landlocked nations allied to southern India. So they could still form under one flag, but it might be a union instead. But not at this moment, because they're still kind of new. We can go to the Aral country because at this point they did the whole becoming a democracy thing, and they invaded this green country. And there's not a huge reason to cover this, but like, blam, they invade and they take the capital city, and after this, the nation will capitulate, and we can go to a peace treaty, which looks just like the one that happened in our timeline, because this is a war that happened in our timeline. Blam, cool Aral country. They didn't join in World War One like they did in the real timeline though, so that's kind of different. China, Russia, anyway, episode 73 then, the Russians invaded Astrakhan. However, Astrakhan is kind of strong, and they're also less focused on this Europeanish stuff. So instead, what they're going to be doing is invading the nation of whatever this is. By it's not a very important country or a very big one, it's just like the easiest country to invade, and the one that makes the borders look the least awful, I think. So yeah, now they get invaded, bye-bye. But it's kind of the fact they're strengthening their territory over here in Asia, rather than focusing on Europe and attacking a country like Astrakhan, Ukraine, or Finland. Then there's the Mesopotamian invasion of Caucasia. Arguably, Caucasia would be weaker in this timeline, however there is a lot of Ukrainian stuff in this territory. I think this is probably wealthier than this, but there was a lot of land they owned here over there, so maybe it's just about the same. This is less Caucasian ethnic though than the other territory, so like more unruly, I guess. Anyway, the Mesopotamians will have a pretty good time invading here. They are very closely aligned to the Southern Indians in this timeline because of Southern India's partnership with Oman to their south. So I think the Mesopotamians will have probably an easier war as they push it towards the capital city. They definitely struggle to fight through the Caucasus mountain ridge. But they should probably push up to the border of Astrakhan and separate off a load of people, whilst maybe surrounding the capital city. The Ukrainians might want to invade this, but maybe they also wouldn't. And the war will probably take a really long time because Caucasia at this point is probably a top 20 power, I assume. But if the capital and the random eastern region, where a lot of oil comes from, probably, fall, then this area might just rebel, do some other stuff, and a lot of dominoes would fall right at the end, and Mesopotamia takes over all of the Caucasian country. That makes the borders not amazing, but not actually as bad as I thought it would be. Next up is the invasion of Estonia. How the Russians can't invade Estonia because number one, they don't exist, and number two, they're allied to Northern Europe. And then there's the Carthaginian decolonization, which doesn't occur because Carthage doesn't exist. And Spain definitely doesn't decolonize their country because they love being a colonial power. Then there's the Chinese invasion of Northern Sakhalin, or Northern Japan, the island of Sakhalin. They're not over there. However, the Koreans, with fears from China, may actually invade Japanese stuff of their own, potentially invading this country right here. China, in this timeline, did have a lot of ambitions in Japan, and there's probably Chinese propaganda maps showing their ambitions over the Korean territory, and then what they plan to do after that, which is what they did do after that in the real timeline. So this would happen. Maybe we could just skip ahead to the next episode for a little bit, as the Chinese, after that, invaded the nation of Kyushu, over here in southern Japanese Isles, and they could do that to threaten the Koreans, which would probably start a crisis or something, but it's all good. And the Koreans equally might invade a couple more Japanese countries, like this blue one over here. I mean, why not? And maybe this other blue one, just because. They're more of a major power at this point, and all the other major powers in this point in the series are just invading somebody every episode, so, they might as well get involved. These guys could stay as a buffer state, but also they're pretty military minded, I guess. They invaded the Kyushu nation, part of China, during the collapse in World War II. So I'd argue they're probably the more military country in the Japanese Isles. And then there is the very, very famous war between Pakistan and Balochistan, which had a huge civil war for Balochistan, but then also it's this country right here. So Pakistan's just going to absolutely eviscerate them like they did in the real timeline. And goodbye to this unfortunate country. Goodbye. And now we're on episode 74, where we see the partition of Ukraine between the Mesopotamians and the Russians. I think the partnership isn't as important because these countries are both less focused on the European continent, which in a way is more peaceful because it's less divided. Spain doesn't really interact with Northern Europeans, although they definitely could have some rivalry. They don't really. There's not a huge load of rivalry between the Spanish, their allies in Mesopotamia. However, these guys definitely want the decolonization of the world. So maybe there'd be some stuff there. I mean, yeah, I can definitely spin it to make it like a war between Northern Europe and Spanish allies. But I don't think that's the direction this series will really go, because there's bigger fish to fry than random Greater Poland. So yeah, we're going to see the invasion of Ukraine. I'm not entirely sure if I think Romania will get involved. So depending on what I want to do with the borders, I might change my mind after this. We'll see. So don't be surprised in the peace treaty if it looks different. But also, I'm not going to use the borders from our real timeline because there's less Mesopotamia to gain here. They're going to invade in the south, obviously, maybe moving across the Kerch Strait and over here into Crimea, catch the Ukrainians off guard. The Ukrainians are probably more militarized because a lot of people would have wanted to invade into those areas of Caucasia, even if they didn't. It doesn't really matter if they do or don't because, yeah, they're just going to get invaded anyway. The Russians will begin their invasion in the north, moving down the Dnieper River, taking over the capital city of the Ukrainian nation and moving through some of these sparsely populated northern areas, before pushing down to the coast right over here, near... I knew the name of the city and I've forgotten it. Oops. Anyway, there you go. They capitulate that and potentially it goes to Romania if I want them to get involved. Yeah, Romania didn't get anything, but that's fine. They're just a little guy here in this map. They're not as big as they were before, and they're still very much under threat. The Polish, who believe the Romanians are basically just a split-off culture of Poland, and with high Polish nationalism here in Northern Europe, you know, the Germans and the Polish had to cooperate a lot more with the Swedes, so they might not hate each other anymore. Also haven't been to war like loads of times. They just had one little civil war. But you know, so the Slovaks, so it's fine. Yeah, they might try and invade. Anyway, I don't love the borders here in Ukraine. It's just kind of hard to make borders in this place for some reason. But the Russians will take over all of this territory. I might just change this bit a little bit. But that's good. The Russians look a bit weird because they can't really get the same stuff. But Mesopotamia's got a bigger empire, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, what next? I don't figure out. Romanian invasion of Moldova doesn't exist. China invades Kyushu, already did that, and then it's the Xinjiang Civil War. This country isn't actually in Xinjiang. But the borders here will still go the same. Okay, so the Civil War in this country goes the same, and we have all three of these breakaway states exist. Adds a lot more colour to this region. Probably won't change too much, but alternatively it might change like a little thing. And now we can move over to episode 75, where World War I or World War II started. So the Russians invaded the Baltics in this timeline, but I think instead they're going to invade somewhere else, and unfortunately for the very, very new country over here, the Blue Nation, who I maybe would have had rebel earlier, so they get like a little bit more screen time. Or maybe not. They're going to get invaded by the Russians. They're very new, don't really have an identity. It doesn't matter. And the Russians push over, take their capital city, and then push down to the really populated area, apparently, down here in the south, where like 1 billion cities are compared to the north. I don't know if that's geographically accurate at all, but the country is now defeated. So in the peace treaty, they will be fully annexed by the Russians. I feel like the borders would look better if the Mongolians took some territory, which is what happened in real life during the Cold War, and that allowed for the Mongolians to become an ally of the Russians. Like, I just use that as reasoning. Yeah. So that happens. Cool for Russia, I guess. The Mesopotamians also invaded into Oman at this point. However, they're allied to southern India. You guys have close ties with southern India. I think the fact that southern India is here as a delegate means they'll probably arrange more stuff for the Arabic Union between both of these countries. So they would probably arrange it diplomatically rather than with war. The theocratic government over here in Oman wanted the independence of their country rather than to join the Mesopotamian state. However, you know, these guys are pretty scary and they want a big, strong Arabic Union ally, so they could probably persuade these people. And like the young people rebelled and formed a democracy, I think, just before the country got destroyed. So yeah, why not? Anyway, not gonna happen yet because the Chinese probably would invade Baikal. Maybe they would invade it earlier. I think, to be honest, I kind of forgot. But I think Baikal would have been invaded earlier because the Chinese need to secure good positions against the Koreans and the Russians, who really hate them. So China will move across the border in, I don't know, some big front line like this. The Koreans and the Russians probably wouldn't take that long to respond, and you know, the response is fairly predictable, as Russian troops also move over here from the west, taking over all the major important stuff in the western part of the Baikal country, like so. And then the Koreans would invade from over here in the east, pushing in and taking over all the eastern important territory that remains, and then the rest of it would just capitulate because no one lives there, and we would get a cool peace treaty like this. Okay, so I've partitioned up the Baikal country, and these are perhaps some of my favorite borders of the drawn. I really like how this looks. But the Russians gain all of this western territory, the Koreans gain, of course, the eastern bit, and the Chinese gain this bit in the south, which is like the best bit. But it makes their borders kind of weird to look at. I don't mind. Yeah, look how cool this looks. Big scary Russia. And very cool Korea as well. Because the Baikal borders aren't like this spiky. I mean, look at that. That's so cool and jaggedy. Anyway, yeah. I think at this point we might kind of be about to start World War II, and I haven't really thought about how it would start in this timeline. Although I've got a few pretty good ideas. So the only remaining event left to occur is the unification of the Arabic Union. So that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to cause a world war. People just go like, oh, that's kind of bad, I suppose. Here you go. The Arabic Union now exists, which means that you don't get to keep your capital city, and it stays in Mesopotamia. They also don't get to have this territory, but they have the extra Sinai territory they didn't have in real life. Like we just was like the real life Arabic Union shapes something like this. So they've got more Ukrainian territory, a lot of Sinai, Israelistine territory, some stuff in Yemen and Eritrea, but they don't have a bit in the UAE, and also this Astrakhan stuff. So maybe it's kind of even. I don't know. But these guys are of course also allied to Oman, which means the Southern Indians, means the Southern Indian Alliance is even more powerful. So yeah, this is what the world looks like just before World War One, World War Two. Damn it! But I think in a way 2 separate wars might break out, and I think maybe the one let's start with the main one, as the Spanish and their colonial alliance are going to face off against the Southern Indians and their not colonial alliance. Actually, no, they are colonial, but their allies aren't, because they've got the allies of the Arabic Union, the Ganjati country, Orange, Uttarakhand Pradesh, whatever it's called, I don't know, and Indochina, and also Ethiopia. So that's good. The Spanish have their allies of Italy, Ireland, and Wessex, and they will be facing off. So there's a few front lines which are pretty similar, like in Egypt, and actually, no, Egypt wasn't in this war, but Turkey and stuff, blah, blah, blah. That's the same. And Southern India definitely does some different things. And then over here in East Asia, we would see a war break out at about the same time because of a dramatic effect between the Russians and the Koreans, and they're going to go to war with China's alliance, as I think a naval skirmish could happen over here in this water. If we look at this, okay, I thought the islands were a bit different, but oh no, never mind. Here's what I was looking for. The Koreans own these islands, whilst the Chinese own these islands, and the Koreans would have very much fortified this, and the Chinese the same with this. And whilst they're sending their people over to go to these islands, with the Chinese sending them from this bit, and the Koreans from probably this island over here, there's going to be a huge naval fight. The Chinese and the Koreans are both going to blame each other, and eventually it's going to spiral out of control, leading into war. And now East Asia and I don't know, like everywhere else in the world, are in the midst of 2 huge regional wars. They definitely won't coalesce into one big war. So anyway, yeah, that's about the end of today's episode. It was a lot of fun to record. We've made a very cool map. I really like it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time, which is World War II. And then we do World War III in this map. What the hell? Yeah, have a nice rest of your day. Goodbye.